After the blood ran cold, Part 1. The moment after. The blood ran cold long before it dried. It happened in the narrow space between noise and silence, the instant when the last echo of violence faded, and the world realized something irreversible had occurred. The room did not scream. The walls did not collapse. The ceiling fan continued its slow, indifferent rotation, pushing warm air over a body that no longer noticed heat. Outside, a generator hummed. Somewhere down the street, a radio laughed. Inside, time hesitated. The blood had spread in an uneven pattern, reaching for the legs of a chair, stopping just short of the doorway, as if it understood boundaries better than people did. It was darker than expected, thick, almost thoughtful. No one had imagined it would look so quiet. Adee stood frozen near the window. She had not screamed. She had not run. Her hands trembled, not from fear alone, but from the shock of stillness. Moments ago, the room had been full of motion, voices overlapping, breath quickening, anger sharp enough to cut. Now there was only the sound of her own heartbeat, loud and intrusive, as if it did not belong in the aftermath. She stared at the body on the floor, not at the face. She couldn't yet. At the hands. One lay open, palm up empty. The other was curled slightly, as though it still held a thought it had not finished expressing. Those hands had pointed, accused, pleaded, promised. Now they were only hands again, silent, ordinary, frightening in their simplicity. The blood ran cold, because reality had finally arrived. Not the dramatic kind from stories, not the justice-filled kind from courtrooms. This was reality stripped bare. A life ended, a witness standing, and a future that had just shifted its weight. Adee took a step back. Her heel touched something small and metallic. A sound, soft, almost apologetic, rang out as it rolled across the floor. She looked down. A pen. It had fallen during the struggle. She remembered that much. Someone had been holding it, signing something, writing something, or perhaps threatening to. She did not pick it up. Outside, footsteps passed the building. Someone coughed. Someone greeted another by name. The world was continuing at a pace that suddenly felt obscene. Adee whispered, though no one asked her to speak. "It's done." But done did not mean finished. Because after the blood ran cold, it did not disappear. It waited, and so did the truth. End of Part 1. If you'd like, I can continue with Part 2. What the silence remembered, or shift the focus to another character, an investigator, a neighbor, or even the room itself. Top of form. After the blood ran cold, Part 2. What the silence remembered. Silence, Adee learned, was not empty. It was crowded with things that refused to speak. She sat on the edge of the sofa, careful not to look at the floor, careful not to move too much, as if motion itself might wake the dead. Her hands were folded in her lap, fingers pressed together so tightly they had lost feeling. Somewhere between her wrists, a pulse knocked, steady, impatient, alive. The body had not moved. Of course it hadn't. But the mind insists on checking, on hoping for impossible revisions. Adee glanced up once, just long enough to confirm what she already knew. The chest did not rise. The eyes stared at nothing, unbothered by light or witness. The silence watched her back. It noticed the way she avoided the window now, afraid of reflections. It noticed the stain on her sleeve, small, almost polite. It noticed the pen on the floor, still resting where it had rolled, its ink trapped inside, its words forever unwritten. The silence remembered everything. A knock came at the door. 3 sharp taps. Not loud. Not gentle. The kind of knock that asked nothing and announced everything. Adee flinched. Her mind raced through lies before it remembered there was no time to prepare one. She did not stand immediately. For a moment, she simply listened, heart in her ears, breath shallow, the silence swelling around her like a held breath. Another knock. Firmer. "Madam," a voice called. Male. Young. Uncertain. "Is everything all right?" Everything. The word felt heavy. Everything had just collapsed into this room, into this moment, and now someone wanted to know if it was all right. Adee stood. Her legs threatened to betray her, but they held. She stepped carefully, avoiding the dark shape on the floor, the way one avoids a sleeping animal whose temper is unknown. Each step felt louder than the last, though the room remained stubbornly quiet. She reached the door and rested her palm against it. Through the thin wood, she could feel the world waiting. Neighbors, questions, consequences. On this side of the door was blood cooling into permanence. On the other was a future already forming its first accusation. "I'm coming," she said. Her voice sounded different. Lower. Older. She opened the door. The hallway light spilled in, touching the edge of the room, stopping short of the body as if it, too, understood boundaries. The young man, security, perhaps, or a neighbor, paused, eyes flicking past her shoulder. The silence leaned forward. "What happened?" he asked. Adi swallowed. The truth pressed against her teeth, heavy and unshaped. Not the whole truth, never that, but enough to begin the unraveling. "There's been an incident," she said. The silence recorded it, because after the blood ran cold, words became evidence. And every pause, every breath, every choice of what not to say began to matter. Behind her, the pen lay where it had fallen, waiting. And a part 2. If you'd like, I can continue with part 3. The first question or shift perspectives to the man at the door, to the investigators, or to the memory of the one who can no longer speak. Top of form. Bottom of form. After the blood ran cold, part 3. The first question. The first question was never the right one. It arrived wrapped in politeness, delivered softly, so it wouldn't startle the truth into hiding. The young man in the hallway cleared his throat, eyes darting between Adi's face and the shadowed room behind her. "Are you hurt?" he asked. Adiz looked down at herself, as if seeing her body for the first time. Her clothes were intact, her skin unbroken. Only the small stain on her sleeve suggested that the night had reached for her and missed. "No," she said. "I'm not." The answer felt incomplete, but it would do. The man nodded, relief crossing his face too quickly. He had hoped for this answer. It meant the problem belonged to someone else now. He reached for his phone, thumb hovering, already dialing a number he had memorized long ago. "I need to call this in," he said, almost apologetically. "I know," Adiz replied. She stepped aside. The room opened itself to a stranger. The man froze when he saw the body. Everyone did, the first time. The way life abandoned flesh without warning always surprised people, no matter how many stories they'd heard. He took a step back, then another, as if the sight might reach out and grab him. "Oh," he breathed. "Oh God!" The silence marked the moment. The call was made. Words like emergency, possible homicide, send someone now traveled down the line, transforming the room from a private disaster into a public one. Adiz listened, noting how easily language turned catastrophe into procedure. When the man finished, he lowered the phone slowly. "They'll be here soon," he said. "Police. Ambulance." She nodded. Soon was already too late. They waited together, not quite facing each other, not quite facing the truth. Adiz's gaze drifted back to the floor, to the blood now losing its shine. Cold indeed. It looked older now, as if it had always been there. "Did you know him?" the man asked. There it was, the first question that mattered. Adiz's mouth went dry. In her mind, memories rose uninvited. The sound of his voice when he was calm, when he was angry, the way he leaned forward when he thought he was right, the pen in his hand, tapping against the table like a warning. "Yes," she said. "How well?" The silence leaned in closer. "Well enough," she replied. It was true. It was also useless. Sirens wailed in the distance, faint, but unmistakable. The future announcing itself. Adiz closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, anchoring herself to the present. After the blood ran cold, there was no more hiding behind shock. There were only questions now, and the first one had already drawn blood of its own. End of part 3. If you're ready, I can continue with part 4. Arrival or explore the past, what led to the moment when the blood first began to run. After the blood ran cold, part 4. Arrival. They arrived in layers. First the sound, sirens cutting through the night, growing louder, sharper, impossible to ignore. Then the lights, flashing red and blue across the hallway walls, turning ordinary stains into accusations. Finally, the people. Uniforms, clipped movements, practiced faces already preparing to forget. The silence retreated, but it did not leave. Two police officers entered first. One older, shoulders heavy with routine. The other younger, eyes still betraying curiosity. Behind them came the paramedics, rolling equipment that would not be used for its intended purpose. "Ma'am," the older officer said to Adiz, his voice calm, almost gentle. "I need you to step out into the hallway." She obeyed. As she crossed the threshold, the room seemed to exhale, relieved to release her. The hallway felt colder, narrower. A neighbor stood a few doors down, pretending not to watch, failing badly. "Name?" the officer asked. "Adiz Okari." He wrote it down. The pen scratched against paper, too similar to the sound she remembered. Her eyes flicked toward his hand before she could stop herself. "Anyone else inside the apartment?" the younger officer asked. "No." "When did this happen?" "I don't know," she said. "Not exactly." The older officer nodded. He had heard that answer many times. Time bent under trauma. It slipped. It lied. Inside the room, a paramedic checked for signs that everyone already knew were gone. Another pulled a white sheet from a bag and hesitated, waiting for permission from procedure rather than conscience. "Cause of death looks violent," the younger officer muttered. Everything about death like this was violent, Adiz thought. Even the quiet parts. "Ma'am," the older officer continued, "I need you to walk me through what happened tonight." The sentence landed heavily. This was the moment where memory became narrative, where fear shaped facts, where truth risked being edited by survival. Adiz took a breath. "We were talking," she began. "It became an argument. About..." She paused. "About power, about money, about silence that had lasted too long, and words that finally refused to stay buried. But she chose a simpler shape. About documents," she said. The officer's pen stopped. "What kind of documents?" "Ones he didn't want signed." Inside the apartment, the sheet was finally pulled up, covering the body, stopping at the shoulders. The face disappeared. The hands vanished last. Adiz felt something twist in her chest. Not grief, not relief, but the sharp knowledge that what was hidden could still speak. The younger officer looked up. Was there a weapon involved? Her gaze drifted, unbidden, to the doorway, to the invisible line where the blood had stopped short. "I didn't see one," she said. Another truth. Another omission. The officer wrote. After the blood ran cold, the room no longer belonged to the dead. It belonged to those who would decide what the dead meant. And Adiz stood in the hallway, watching her life turn into a case file, one careful question at a time. End of part 4. If you want, I can continue with part 5. Statements or shift backward to reveal what was written, or meant to be written, before everything fell apart. After the blood ran cold, part 5. Statements. They called it a statement, as if words could simply stand on their own. Adiz sat at the small table in the hallway office, the kind meant for quick paperwork and forgotten keys. The chair was hard. The light above her buzzed faintly, impatient. Across from her, the older officer placed a recorder between them, its red light blinking like a small, unblinking eye. "This is just routine," he said. "Take your time." Time, Adiz thought, had already taken everything it wanted. She nodded anyway. "Please tell us, in your own words, what happened from the beginning." From the beginning. The phrase reached backward, dragging memories forward whether she invited them or not. She saw the apartment earlier that evening. Neat, deliberate, arranged to suggest control. She remembered the way he had sat across from her, sleeves rolled up, pen tapping once, twice, 3 times against the table. She began carefully. "He came over to discuss some paperwork," she said. "It was supposed to be quick." The officer listened without interrupting, his face neutral, trained not to reveal interest or doubt. The younger officer leaned against the wall, arms folded, eyes sharp. "And then," the older one prompted, "and then it stopped being quick." Her voice remained steady. She was surprised by that. Inside, everything felt loose, unmoored, but her words lined up obediently, one after another. He raised his voice, accused me of things that weren't true. "Did you feel threatened?" the younger officer asked. The question hovered. Did she feel threatened then or now? By his words, his presence, his certainty that nothing would happen to him? "Yes," she said. "I did." The recorder caught it all. No tone, no hesitation, Just the word. The older officer nodded slightly and glanced at his notes. At any point, did he attempt to leave? Adiz hesitated for the first time. He said he was done talking, she said slowly. But he didn't leave. The silence noticed the gap. It always did. Did you try to leave? The officer asked. No. Why not? Because fear doesn't always push you toward the door. Sometimes it nails your feet to the floor. Sometimes it convinces you that staying is safer than turning your back. I wanted him to listen, she said instead. The younger officer exhaled softly, almost inaudibly. And the physical altercation, the older one asked. Adiz's fingers tightened in her lap. It happened fast, she said. There was shouting. He moved toward me. Did he touch you? Yes. The word felt heavier this time. And after that, she swallowed. There was a struggle, she said. Then he fell. The room seemed to lean forward. Did you push him? I don't know, she replied. I don't remember clearly. True enough to survive. The older officer clicked off the recorder. For now, that's sufficient, he said. We may need to speak again. May sounded generous. Adiz knew better. As they stood, the younger officer glanced at her sleeve. You might want to change clothes, he said quietly. Those will be collected as evidence. Evidence. After the blood ran cold, even fabric learned how to testify. Adiz stood slowly, feeling the weight of her words settle into the room behind her. Somewhere, inside the sealed apartment, the pen still waited, its silence louder now, its meaning unresolved. Statements had been made, but the truth was not finished speaking. End of part 5. If you'd like, I can continue with part 6, The Night Without Sleep, or follow the investigation as it begins to test the cracks in Adiz's carefully chosen words. Top of form, bottom of form, top of form, bottom of form. After the blood ran cold, part 6, What refused to stay buried. Morning arrived without warmth. The sun rose, yes, but it gave nothing back. Its light slid across the city like a witness who had seen too much and chosen silence. Adiz stood at her kitchen sink, the tap running long after the cup was full. Her hands trembled, not from fear anymore, but from something colder, certainty. The blood had run cold, but it had not finished speaking. The file lay open on her table. Not the official case file, the other one. The one assembled from margins, whispers, misfiled reports, and the kind of truths that never made it into court transcripts. She had spent the night rereading it, following threads she once dismissed as coincidence. They weren't coincidences. 3 witnesses had recanted. 2 officers had transferred within days. 1 forensic report had been corrected after midnight, and every alteration pointed inward, toward the institution itself. Adiz exhaled slowly. The crime was not a moment. It was a system. At 9:13 a.m., her phone buzzed. Unknown number. You're asking the wrong questions. She stared at the screen. Then another message arrived. Or maybe the right ones. Just too loudly. Her pulse slowed instead of spiking. Whoever this was, they were afraid. And fear meant proximity. She typed back. Then answer them. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, reappeared. Finally, meet me where the city pretends nothing happened. The old civic square had been renovated beyond recognition. New tiles, new benches, a fountain that sang over the exact spot where the protest had turned violent years ago, where blood had once soaked into stone before officials called it an unfortunate incident. Adiz arrived early. She watched families pass through, unaware or unwilling to remember. That, too, was part of the design. A man sat beside her without introduction. Mid-40s, civil servant posture, eyes that never stopped scanning. I didn't kill anyone, he said quietly. I didn't say you did, Adiz replied. But you're reopening graves, he said. That makes you dangerous. She turned to him. Then you know something. He nodded once. They didn't mean to let him die, he said. They meant to scare him. To make an example. Who? She asked. He smiled bitterly. The same people who taught us that silence is loyalty. He slid a folded document between them. Internal memo, he whispered. Stamped, signed, buried. Orders came from above. Afterward, the narrative was cleaned. Evidence didn't disappear. It was redirected. Adiz unfolded the paper. Names. Dates. Authorization codes. Her breath caught, not from shock, but recognition. One of the signatures belonged to a man who still gave speeches about justice. "Why give this to me?" she asked. "Because I couldn't sleep anymore," he said. "And because when the blood ran cold, I realized it was already on my hands." He stood and walked away before she could ask another question. That night, Adiz locked her door and sat in the dark. She didn't cry. She didn't panic. She planned. Truth, she now understood, wasn't a bomb. It was erosion. Slow. Relentless. Impossible to stop once it began. She opened her laptop and began to write. Not accusations, not conclusions, but a timeline. Every lie in order. Every silence named. Every hand traced. Outside, the city slept peacefully. Inside, something ancient and unforgiving had woken up. And it would not rest until every warm excuse turned cold. End of part 6. If you want, I can continue with part 7, where the backlash begins, or shift focus to the people who will try to stop her once they realize she's no longer alone. Top of form. Bottom of form. After the blood ran cold, part 7. The price of being heard. The first article went live at 6:02 a.m. No headlines screamed. No names were shouted. Adiz chose restraint, the kind that made powerful people lean forward instead of laugh. A timeline of silence, how an incident became a system. By 6:19, it had been shared twice. By 6:47, 43 times. By 7:30, it was gone. The page refreshed into an error. Adiz stared at the screen, unsurprised. Truth never lasted long in places where lies had tenure. Her email inbox began to fill, not with praise, but with absence. Messages bounced. Access revoked. Credentials she had held for years expired without warning. At 8:11, her editor called. "You didn't run this by legal," he said. "I ran it by conscience," Adiz replied. There was a long pause. "They're asking questions," he said carefully. "About you." "Good," she said. "They should. They're not asking me," he whispered. "They're asking the board." The line went dead. By noon, a counter-narrative appeared. A press release. Polished. Bloodless. An independent review confirms no institutional wrongdoing. The language was familiar. The same phrases, recycled from older scandals, scrubbed of meaning and heavy with authority. Adiz recognized entire sentences lifted from the memo she'd been given, stripped of context and rebranded as exoneration. They weren't just responding. They were adapting. The first threat arrived at 2:04 p.m. Not violent. Not crude. "You have misunderstood your role." The second followed minutes later. "There are safer ways to contribute to society." Adiz forwarded them to a secure folder and kept working. Fear, she had learned, was a finite resource. Spend it early, and it loses power. At dusk, she met with 3 others in a room that smelled of old books and burnt coffee. A retired clerk, a former investigator, a young data analyst who had never learned when to stop asking questions. None of them were heroes. That was the point. "We're already being watched," the analyst said, projecting charts onto the wall. "Traffic spikes, IP tracing, content suppression. They don't know how much we have, but they know it's more than before." The retired clerk slid forward a box of documents. "I kept copies," she said simply. "They told me to shred them. I told them the machine was broken." Adiz smiled for the first time in days. "Then let's be very careful with what still works," she said. The backlash came faster after that. A columnist called her reckless. A radio host called her unstable. An anonymous source suggested she was being used. Adiz listened to none of it. Character attacks were admissions of intellectual defeat. That night, she stood on her balcony and watched the city lights flicker. Somewhere, men in clean offices were rewriting strategies. Somewhere else, a witness was deciding whether fear or truth would win. Her phone buzzed again. A new message. No number. "They're meeting tomorrow. Emergency session. Closed doors." Adiz typed back with steady fingers. "Then we open a window." She closed her eyes. The blood had run cold long ago. Now it was the silence that was beginning to crack. And when it broke, it would not break quietly. End of part 7. Ready for part 8, where the leaks become impossible to contain and the cost of speaking rises for everyone involved. Top of form, bottom of form. After the blood ran cold, Part 8. When silence started to bleed. The leak did not arrive like a flood. It came as a drip. At 5:41 a.m., a single document appeared on a mirror site hosted halfway across the world. No commentary, no headline, just a scan, faded edges, official seal unmistakable. By 6:10, screenshots were circulating. By 6:33, the first denial was issued. And by then, it was already too late. Adiz watched the data stream from her laptop, eyes rimmed red but sharp. Every share, every repost, every translation into new languages was a small act of defiance. The system had been designed to erase quickly, but not to chase everything at once. They're scrambling, the analyst said, voice low with awe. Someone authorized takedowns without the right jurisdiction. They're panicking. Good, Adiz replied. Panic makes mistakes visible. At 9 a.m., the emergency session began. Closed doors, muted microphones, smiles fixed for cameras that were no longer trusted. Inside the room, voices rose. Outside, a protest gathered, not large but precise. They held printed copies of the leaked memo. No chance, just paper raised high. The image spread faster than any slogan. The first resignation came before lunch. A personal reasons statement, carefully worded. No apology, no acknowledgement. Adiz read it twice. They always leave the building before the fire is named, the retired clerk said. Yes, Adiz answered. But smoke still tells a story. At 1:17 p.m., her doorbell rang. She hadn't been followed. She was sure of it. Still, her hand hovered near the recorder as she opened the door. A woman stood there, early 30s, crisp suit, eyes trained to reveal nothing. Ms. Okafor, she said. I'm here on behalf of the committee. Adiz tilted her head. Which one? The woman hesitated. The review body. Independent, Adiz asked. Another pause. May I come in? No, Adiz said gently. But you may speak. The woman swallowed. There are concerns about your safety, she said. About escalation. There were concerns about his safety, too, Adiz replied. They just weren't documented. The woman left without another word. That evening, a new voice joined the noise. A former officer. Face uncovered. Name intact. I was told to stand down, he said on camera. I didn't. That's why I was transferred. That's why the report was rewritten. He looked straight into the lens. We didn't lose control. We followed orders. The clip went viral. The drip became a wound. Adiz sat alone after midnight, listening to the city breathe. She knew what came next. Truth had a momentum of its own, but momentum invited resistance. The more visible she became, the more dangerous invisibility would be for others. Her phone lit up one last time. They're not asking how to stop you anymore. She typed back. What are they asking? The reply came slower than before. How much it will cost? Adiz closed her eyes. Some prices were meant to be paid, and some debts had waited long enough. End of Part 8. If you're ready, Part 9 will push everything to the edge, where justice threatens to become theater, and Adiz must decide how far she's willing to go when truth demands more than exposure. Top of form, bottom of form. After the blood ran cold, Part 9. The edge of the stage. The inquiry was announced on a Monday. Televised, branded, packaged with a logo that promised seriousness and delivered spectacle. Adiz watched the press conference from her desk, arms folded, expression unreadable. Rows of officials stood behind the podium like scenery, faces chosen not for guilt or innocence, but for how well they looked under lights. Justice, the chairperson declared, must not only be done, but be seen to be done. Adiz muted the sound. Seen was the problem. Within hours, invitations went out. Selective subpoenas, controlled witness lists, timelines designed to end before they became inconvenient. They wanted closure without consequence. They're turning it into theater, the former investigator said during a secure call. Big gestures, small truths, and a sacrificial offering, the analyst added. One mid-level official. Enough to quiet the crowd. Adiz leaned back. They don't understand erosion, she said. They think this is a wave. The night before her testimony, the pressure sharpened. A legal notice arrived, polite, threatening, immaculate. It warned of potential liability and national stability. Then came the softer appeal. A meeting request. Off the record. They want to talk, her editor said, voice strained. They want you to talk. Adiz considered it. No, she said finally. They've had years. The hearing room smelled of polish and old fear. Cameras lined the walls. The audience overflowed into corridors. Outside, rain fell steadily, washing the city in gray. Adiz took the oath and sat. The questions began safe. Dates, sources, methodology. Then they shifted. Would you agree, a committee member asked, that your reporting may have inflamed public sentiment? Adiz looked directly at him. Public sentiment was inflamed by a death, she said. I documented the heat. Murmurs rippled through the room. When they tried to narrow her testimony, she widened it. She spoke of patterns, not incidents. Of systems, not mistakes. Of how truth didn't disappear. It was rerouted, delayed, buried under procedure. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Midway through, something unexpected happened. The chairperson's tablet lit up. A note passed behind the bench. For the first time, the script wavered. Outside the room, someone had released the second tranche, audio this time. A meeting recording. Voices unmistakable. Orders explicit. The audience gasped as alerts buzzed across phones. The theater cracked. The hearing was adjourned for technical reasons. Cameras cut. Officials vanished through side doors. Adiz remained seated. She knew what she had done. She had forced a choice. Expose everything and lose control. Or shut it down and admit the lie. Neither option favored them. That night, as rain turned to thunder, Adiz stood alone in the emptied hall. Her phone vibrated. You've crossed the line. She typed back slowly. There was no line. There was only silence. She slipped the phone into her pocket and walked out into the storm. Justice might still try to dress itself up, but the blood had run cold. And now, so had the excuses. After the blood ran cold, Part 10. What remains when the noise fades? The verdict did not come with a drum roll. It arrived on an ordinary Thursday, buried between market reports and weather warnings. No sirens, no spectacle, just a statement, measured, cautious, irreversible. Multiple indictments, independent prosecutions, a reopening of cases long declared closed. Adiz read the notice twice, then once more, as if expecting the words to evaporate. They didn't. Some names fell quickly. Resignations became routine. Portraits disappeared from hallways. Men who once spoke in absolutes now issued apologies written by lawyers and emptied of meaning. Others held on. They always did. Justice, Adiz understood, was never a sweep. It was a sorting. The city reacted in fragments. There were no riots, no parades. Instead, there were conversations. Quiet ones. In buses, in classrooms, in living rooms where children asked careful questions and adults searched for honest answers. Memory had returned. And memory, once awake, was difficult to silence. Adiz stepped back from the spotlight. Not out of fear, but out of fidelity. Her work was done here. The stories would continue without her name attached. That was how she knew they were true. On her last day in the office, she packed lightly. The timeline, the recorder, the folded memo that started it all. She left the rest behind. She visited the place where it began. The square no longer pretended nothing had happened. A small plaque stood near the fountain. No embellishment, no excuses, just a name, a date, and a sentence that told the truth. We remember because forgetting is a choice. Adiz stood there for a long time. She did not feel victory. She felt something colder and steadier. Resolution. That evening, she wrote one final piece. Not an expose, not an indictment, a reflection. She wrote about how blood runs warm only once, how institutions freeze to survive, and how it is always ordinary people, not heroes, who warm truth back into motion. She ended with a line she did not sign. The silence did not break on its own. It was broken. Night fell. The city breathed. Somewhere, another injustice was beginning. Somewhere else, someone was noticing for the first time. Adiz closed her laptop and stepped into the dark, unafraid. The blood had run cold, but the story at last was alive.